Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. I just now understood the phrase, revenge is a dish best served cold. How to train your roommate. This is the story of how I used Pavlovian conditioning to train my formerly obnoxious roommate to behave like a responsible adult. So the three of us are nurses, and we all live in this company-provided apartment. Each of us has his own room, which is joined by this common area that doubles as a kitchen and dining area, but the walls are paper thin and don't provide enough soundproofing. So if one were to, say, have a loud conversation in the common area during the late hours of the night, it would resonate through all the rooms adjacent. But if you were in your own room talking to somebody, it wouldn't be heard outside. Basically, any sound that you make on the common room could be heard in all the rooms. Now, this isn't a problem during the day, but at night, when everyone is asleep, our one obnoxious roommate always decides to have his Facebook video calls on the common room using his phone, waking everyone up with his loud conversations. And since we're nurses, we have to work in shifts. Me and the second roommate work on a 12-hour day shift, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., while the third obnoxious one works on a 12-hour night shift, 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. So the third roommate tends to be awake at night. We get to sleep soundly when our third roommate has worked, but every time he doesn't have to go to work, the two of us tend to be disturbed by his late-night blabbering on his phone. We tried to handle it the adult way by talking to him about it and suggesting he do his antics inside his own room, since while we're in there, we wouldn't hear his loud conversations and he wouldn't wake us up at night, especially if we had to go to work in the morning. This worked for a while, but eventually he went back to his old habits of waking us up at night. We were getting so tired of the situation because all we wanted to do after a long 12-hour shift was be able to sleep soundly, especially if we still had to go to work the next day. Our hallelujah came from an episode of The Office that I just watched, wherein Jim trained Dwight to crave a breath mint every time he restarted his computer. A light bulb suddenly switched on in my head to use our Wi-Fi to train my noisy roommate. Nobody else knew that I had admin privileges. I just happened to be there when the guys installed it, and they gave me the key. I realized that I had access to our Wi-Fi network wirelessly on my phone and could turn it on and off on a whim like a god. My MO was simple. Every time I get woken up by noisy roommate taking his internet calls in the common room, I would turn off the Wi-Fi of the whole house and wait until he goes back to his room before turning it on again. The training took months and countless late nights. After getting woken up at night by said roommate, I'd wait for an opportune time, usually when he was deep in a loud conversation with someone, to turn off the Wi-Fi. I then wait for him to get annoyed and curse our service provider until he finally gives up and goes to his room. Cue for me to turn it back on. The late night calls in the common room became less and less until he no longer took them in the common room at all. This translated to silent nights for me and the second roommate, who had to work in the morning. My method was so effective that he actually thought there was a problem with his phone. Sometime later, he wanted to show me a video of something on his phone, but said that I had to come to his room to show me since there was a problem with it and it wouldn't work in the common room. I was grinning like the devil the entire time. And our next story. Busybody, stay-at-home mom neighbor harasses me until my restraining order kicks her out of her house. I lived across the street from a very bored stay-at-home mom whose excess idle time turned her into an insufferable busybody. Her husband backed out of the driveway and slammed into my roommate's car parked on the curb. He apologized, gave us insurance info, and took care of it. He was never a problem because he accepted responsibility for what he did. His wife, however, demanded that we never ever park any cars at the curb again because we can't get out of our driveway otherwise. The street was very wide. She was just completely unable to accept that the accident was her husband's fault and figured we were somehow responsible for it. Ergo, we were responsible for preventing it in the future. We told her that we would avoid parking there whenever possible, but that we still had the legal right to park on the street, and that if necessary, we would still do so. And that it was her husband's responsibility to avoid hitting other people's legally parked cars when backing out of the driveway. She wasn't happy with that answer, but just told us we better stay out of her family's way and stormed off. One day she came storming over, banging on the front door, cussing us out. When we got her on our security camera saying, "If you don't move that effing car in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to effing total it with my truck. It'll be your fault, and you'll have to pay for the damage to my effing vehicle." To this, I simply responded, "I don't know whose car that is, but I didn't park it there. I have you on camera, so if you do anything to that car, I'll have to call the police and hand over this tape. She then threatened to sue me for invasion of privacy for recording her and still insisted that we move the car even though it wasn't our property. We just ignored her. She didn't do anything to the car. We did keep the recording, though. A few weeks later, I had a friend visit from out of town. He parked his car on the curb, then started unloading some stuff from his trunk. She came storming out, screaming and cussing at him. "I've told you repeatedly, never park your effing car on this curb. If you don't move it, I'm going to effing total it, and you can effing pay for a new GD car, as well as the damage you do to mine." He tried to calm her down and asked if there was somewhere else he could park, and she replied, "You can park it in hell, because that's where you'll be after I effing kill you." Unfortunately for her, he had his dash cam running the whole time, and it captured everything. He called the police, and she was arrested for threatening to commit vandalism and for threatening violence. A few days later, she left a long-winded hate letter in our mailbox, written as if it were an open letter from the entire neighborhood. And it basically said that nobody knows who you are, and everybody wishes you would move away, and nobody wants you living in our neighborhood. Thing is, she forgot about the security cameras. I took the video of her opening my mailbox, which included her taking all of our letters out of the mailbox and rifling through them. I gave them to the post office. This led her to getting arrested for a second time that week. After that, we used her 2 arrests, our collection of security and dashcam footage, and her letter to get a restraining order against her that actually prohibited her from entering her own home. Then we called the police every time we saw her because she was in violation of the order. She ended up having to live in a hotel, and her husband came over, apologized to us, and asked if we would drop the restraining order so his wife could come home. I told him I would do it, but only if she wrote me, my wife, our roommates, and the friend of mine she threatened a 1-page apology for her harassment, and that she would promise to never, ever contact us again for any reason whatsoever moving forward. I received no apology, and the house went on the market a week later. And our last story. Lady orders me to let her out of a no parking zone. I have a highly specific job that usually sends me to construction sites where somebody not knowing what I do would say, I just watch the digger load trucks. Of course, it's more complicated than that, but it's not important for the story. My company is usually hired by the owner of the site, not the company, which is actually building there. Because of this, I only have to work with the workers there, but I'm not required to do something else. So, on to the story. I was sent to a construction site in the city with a very few parking spaces nearby. Because of this, the company building there had a deal with the city to declare space alongside the road, usually used for parking, to a no parking zone to be able to store some of their stuff, and had set up signs to make this clear. It was summer at the time and pretty hot. The operator of the digger and I were the only people on site through lunchtime when some lady shouted at me to come to the entrance of the construction site. I had set myself up in pretty much the only piece of shade on the whole site and really wasn't in the mood to leave that spot. So I shouted back at her to tell me what she wants. Turns out she had parked in the no parking zone and hadn't noticed that the workers had set up a movable fence to surround that zone to be able to store their tools there without getting stolen right away. So her car, a Porsche, was almost boxed in as 2/3 of her vehicle was in the no parking zone. She's still shouting at me. After seeing what's going on, I get interested and move on. I get to her, covered in dust, taking my time, moving up to her. She was in her 40s maybe, wore high heels and a nice dress, typical businesswoman. The whole time she was shouting to me to speed up and move faster. She was in a hurry. So finally, I'm in front of her. Lady, finally, that took you ages. Now move that damn fence so I can pull out of there. Why would you even box me in? I turn around slowly and look at her car. It would have been easy for me, or even for herself, to move the fence and let her out, but she wasn't very nice, and I wasn't obliged to help her. Me. Sorry, won't do that. Lady. What? Why would you say that? Let me out. Not nice word. Me. I don't work here. I said that standing in front of her, covered in dust, wearing my high visibility vest and my hard hat. Left her speechless for a moment, then all hell broke loose. I was lying. She would get me fired. She would call the police because this was theft. She knew the mayor and all sorts of other things. I just stood there, pretty amused on the inside, just like the operator and his digger who was laughing so loud I could almost hear him over her screeching. While it was amusing to see her go off at this point, I was a bit PO'd too, because I could only imagine how this entitled brat was speaking to people she actually had power over. While she was in her tirade, 2 policemen turned the corner. She must have noticed the grin on my face because she abruptly turned around and saw the 2 approaching her. Lady, finally, someone who can help me. Tell this, another not nice word, to move the fence so I can pull out. The 2 policemen looked at her and then at her car. Finally at me. One of them walked to the vehicle and the other approached me. PM, what's going on here? Me, she ordered me to let her out of the no parking zone, but I don't work for building company's name. I pointed to the big signs where the well-known building company advertised itself to my name tag. I wear one in my high-visibility vest with my company's name on it. The policeman understood pretty fast. These no parking zones are pretty common in the city. He walked over to his colleague, who was the target of the woman now, and said a few words to him. He pulled out a little book and began writing a ticket. Only then did it dawn on the lady that she was in trouble. She still kept shouting that she did nothing wrong because she was boxed in and wouldn't be in the no parking zone if I would have let her pull away. PM, he doesn't work here, and you're parking in a no parking zone. Here's your ticket. He handed her the ticket and moved the fence to let her out. She was standing there a few seconds with the ticket in hand, speechless, then got in her car, gave me the stink eye, and went off. I tipped my hard hat when the 2 policemen continued their walk and went back to tell the operator of the digger what happened. Had a good laugh after all. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.